Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called Don't Poke the Humans, written by Sneaky the Lost. Transcript from longer treatise, care of Galactic Federation University on Epsilon Delta. Relevant section to your data request, Captain. Frankly, the implications, if accurate, are terrifying. Fortunately, that is a decision to be made at a higher pay grade than mine. You asked for the information, here you go. On the use of non-guided weapon systems and their implications. A study into the unique applications of non-guided systems deployed by Terran Federation, their countermeasures to such, and the implications for the galaxy at large. Premise: humans are a relative newcomer to the galactic community, being stuck out on the Orion Arm far away from the central polities. As with most newcomers, their tech levels were a hodgepodge of mismatched advances based on their particular survival stresses and needs. However, unlike most newcomers, rather than abandon their old weapon systems in favor of the galactic standard, they have chosen instead to incorporate their old weapons into their new doctrine. It was a move most had found baffling, perhaps even bespeaking a more primitive culture incapable of adapting to new threats easily. However, upon further and careful study, I believe I may have a reason as to why they have adopted their current doctrine, which carries some very interesting implications for the state of future warfare. In short, it may not be them who have become doctrinally rigid. It may, in fact, be us. Basis: anyone with anything resembling a modern military relies on guided munitions, or at least munitions with a guided component to them, in order to achieve effective hits on targets. This has been undisputed fact going all the way back to the founding of the Galactic Council following the Ascension Wars. The ships who won that war were equipped with guided munitions and have established their superiority ever since. And the reason is quite simple. Space is vast, and engagement windows for guided munitions are simply larger than non-guided munitions, and for a very good reason. Non-guided munitions can be dodged with even the slightest course correction at any reasonable distance. Even as close as a light minute, a kinetic weapon will take many minutes to arrive at the theoretical intercept point to generate a hit. Thus, the navigator need only make even the slightest correction during that time to render the weapon entirely ineffective. You would need to be within boarding range for kinetics to have any hope of achieving a hit. But there are other such weapon systems that are not guided. There are the C-fractional weapon systems, such as plasma launchers, who can be launched at much higher speeds than solid slug projectiles, and directed energy weapons such as lasers, phasers, grazers, and such. However, these weapons have their downsides as well. They cannot be dodged simply due to sensor lag. By the time your sensor report the enemy has fired, their weapon system is already upon you. Although the C-fractional systems have at least some time gap at medium or greater ranges, say 5 to 10 light minutes. Therefore, they would only be useful at shorter ranges regardless. However, they are burdened by basic ship construction itself. Space, despite being described as being empty, isn't. Oh yes, it is a vacuum, in that sense at least. However, you have many stellar objects emitting on all sorts of wavelengths constantly, creating a background of cosmic radiation that the frail and fragile biological organisms crewing the vessels must somehow be able to withstand. And so any vessel wishing to ply spaceways must therefore have a certain minimum amount of radiation shielding. Furthermore, micrometeors are not an uncommon phenomenon, at least in system, and a potentially lethal one. Therefore, particle screens have been developed to counter these natural threats. They just also happen to severely mitigate, if not outright laugh, at any sort of C-fractional or directed energy weapon. Or so we thought. However, even this isn't the biggest challenge with non-guided munitions. The biggest challenge goes right back to the old adage: space is vast. Even at a light minute, or even at a massive Pollux-class supercargo hauler, is but a tiny speck, only able to be identified by its emission signatures. There is no way anyone is going to be hitting something that far away with something that can't course correct. The idea itself is absurd. It would be like picking out a specific grain of sand on a beach a half-kilometer away with a magnifying glass. And yet, the humans seem to have come up with a way to do it. Additional data points to support the premise. I had a chance to visit the Ancient History Museum on Alpha Centauri, the humans' very first extrasolar colony, something also quite unusual. Most races tend to try and forget their pasts when they step onto the galactic playing field. Generally, there is a feeling of embarrassment at how crude and clumsy one's first steps are. Yet, these humans not only aren't embarrassed by it, they take perverse sense of pride in their missteps, and not only are they willing to let others see their history, they are eager to show it off. Some might say that it is akin to a fledgling eagerly showing off their first work of art, crude though it may be, seeking acceptance from their elders in the attempt. Yet I would not be so dismissive. They are eager for others to see their history, yes, but there is a deeper reason for it. Eager enough that my foreign status was sufficient to gain me free entry to the museum and its many exhibits. When I arrived, I immediately noticed that I was one of the very few non-humans there. Indeed, I felt strangely like an explorer in uncharted territory, perhaps even a first contact team on a pre-FTL planet. Yet, they were eager to see me. Indeed, when I presented my educational credentials, they were even more eager for me to visit and provide feedback, which was certainly novel. But their history shocked me to the core. Most species have some level of violence in their history. Necessity truly is the mother of invention, and predation stresses are a common factor in the galaxy for sapiens to develop. Yet, I have never heard of any species quite so violent, and so open about their violence as humans. Their history was not merely shaped by war, but was cast from the very mold of combat and conflict. Humans may have started out as prey, but they quickly became predators, and did not give up that status just because they got smarter. And something interesting came to me when observing their earliest historical periods. They used ranged weapons, not guided projectiles, even into the earliest of their records that date back before even inventing the written word, and more so did so effectively. First it was hunters throwing spears at large prey items. Then there were slings and arrows. For thousands of years before even their industrial period, they made use of these primitive but effective ranged weapons. Humanity competed with itself throughout their entire history, and that competition brought with it a race to do better than your neighbors at killing or not being killed. It was a deeply unsettling philosophy that these humans simply took for granted. Be able to protect yourself from your neighbor, or they might conquer you. It was hard to imagine such a hostile and competitive environment that even your own neighbor might slit your throat for their gain. It was even harder to imagine such a hostile race making it to the stars. Then I got to their Industrial Revolution period, a shockingly brief period of time when all is said and done. In the space of a bare century, they had gone from animal-drawn carriages to internal combustion engines, to aircraft, to orbital launches. They had developed, then perfected the combustion-propelled projectile in ways that I'd never seen or even heard of before. Even when guided munitions had started to be developed, still they developed and produced and used non-guided projectiles. They didn't have the same range, true, but sooner or later they came into play anyway. Then I got to their computer age, and I began to see, with a mix of wonder and horror, just why these humans still use the weapon systems we find primitive. Guided weapon systems being shot down by non-guided point defense was nothing new, although it was generally seen as a final layer of defense, splitting into the wind as some would call it, in the hopes that a saturation attacks leakers might find themselves yet again blunted and numbers reduced. However, what fascinated me was the use of non-guided projectiles being fired over the horizon at targets the shooters could not see, and despite any lack of guidance package on the projectile, still being able to hit a moving and even evading targets by being able to calculate not just where their target was, but where it would be. The concept was horrifyingly simple. A body in motion must continue in motion unless an outside force acts upon it. The momentum and inertia are inescapable laws which govern motion, which gave a relatively limited window of potential trajectories. An object which already possessed a vector may shift that vector to traverse. From this, you can further narrow down the potential degree of vector delta by the limitations of the crew of given a vessel. There is only so much stress a biological organism can withstand after all, which puts an even more strict upper limit on the capacity to alter one's trajectory. That much at least had been theorized, yes, but still covers too wide a volume of space to reliably score a hit on an enemy with a weapon system that cannot be guided onto targets. Or so we thought. However, then humans, ever the conflict with one another, found a solution to this as well. Predictive algorithms. Biological entities are, almost universally, creatures of habit. Habits that can be predicted with a degree of accuracy. At least, if you have the capacity for calculations that some of the human computers allegedly possess. To the humans, the maximum effective range of a non-guided projectile is not measured on the range of whether it is projecting, but by the computer's ability to calculate and predict where its target is going to be to generate an intercept, and the operator's ability to give the correct nudge along the way. The basic formula is based on the targeting computer's ability to predict the target's presence at intercept, reduced by the target's ability to generate a pattern of movements too erratic to calculate with a degree of accuracy, further reduced by the target's ability to detect incoming before it arrives. This last is what gives kinetics the shortest engagement window. Give someone enough time and they can dodge almost anything. However, the speed of some of their kinetics is many times greater than any usual point defense autocannons, increasing that effective range to a surprising distance. The limiting factor in directed energy weapons is the ability to place a focal point on such a long range. In most cases, if you try to fire a laser at a target many light minutes away, it is about as effective as a flashlight. Combined with the vessel's ability to shrug off high-energy radiation, and you have a situation which should, by all rights, make them even less of a threat. Yet, somehow, the humans have solved this problem as well. Their target ships have directed energy weapons capable of having a focal distance of, quote, several light minutes, unquote. I couldn't get anyone to give me more precise figure than that, although I got a lot of what I suspect were sly smiles along with deflections. Their early FTL period of history was the final exhibit in this particular museum, and even here, humanity had waged interstellar war at each other for a few centuries before we ran across them, including their final war of the stars, which had been conducted nearly a century prior to first contact. If the exhibit was to be believed, they were able to engage with directed energy weapons routinely at a range of over a light minute and achieve crippling damage at that range. How they managed that is something left more vague, and a part of me wonders how accurate that is. It was explicitly pointed out to me that these were attained with tech so outdated that was nearly qualified as prehistoric, and computers that are less powerful than the one in my smartwatch, which carried implications that their current ranges will be even further than that. It also suddenly occurred to me that many of the navigation glitches reported on human frigates might in fact be quite deliberate. Human navigators are a laughingstock of the galactic community, having some of the lowest efficiencies ever heard of. However, I posit this: how would one defend oneself against a weapon that moves at the speed of your own sensor array? Heavy human energy weapons do have that sort of reach. How would one protect oneself from it? The answer, I believe, is to constantly be erratic in your trajectory, making random minor course changes here and there. If your course changes were inconsistent enough, it would make calculating your intercept vastly more difficult, albeit at the cost of fuel efficiency. The galaxy at large has run a three-legged race between guided missile systems and point defense systems, Pen-Aids and ECMs against ECCM systems. The humans' race seems to have instead revolved around their computers, the ability to calculate a given trajectory in order to generate an intercept versus a navigation computer's ability to plot a course so twisted as to confound such a tracking computer while minimizing fuel cost. Humanity has been at peace for years now, the longest period of peace in their entire history according to everything I have been able to obtain. But they have been warring since before many species have ever reached the stars, and have been constantly struggling against themselves to perfect their tactics and doctrine of war. I fear the galaxy at large is underestimating them. I fear that their politeness and courtesy is but a mask, one they choose to wear because it is what they prefer to be. They wish to rise above their bestial and warlike nature, which I find admirable. However, I fear whomever the first to try and occupy them are going to find out the hard way that this is only a mask, and that the ferocious predator that lurks underneath that mask is very real indeed. while I have absolutely not a shred of evidence to back this final supposition, I have a hypothesis as to why this is, and it is the same reason I was so eagerly permitted to view their history. It is a warning to any with the wit to listen. Don't poke the humans, and they won't poke you back. But I suspect the first person to ignore that warning will be made an example of to the galactic community at large. There was a phrase that had been repeated numerous times that I saw. It seemed something every human was familiar with. To avoid spilling an ocean's worth of blood, I must demonstrate I am capable of immediately and ruthlessly spilling a lake's worth. It took me a while to really wrap my head around that concept. There are some, like the concept of mutually assured destruction, that I still can't quite grasp as it is such a foreign concept. But that one, I at least think as I understand. It goes back to a philosophy, really. The mind moves the body. Defeat an opponent in their minds, you have already defeated them in body. Minds command vessels. Minds dictate fleet movements. Minds wage war or sue for peace. Present them with losses so horrific that even a victory becomes too costly, and the alternative becomes more economically viable. Peace by any other means, because war would be too costly for the resources that you would acquire. These strange sapiens that have only recently been discovered had been doing their own little galactic polity for some time before we came across them. Unlike most of the other newcomers, their thought processes are so strange, so very different from the usual sapiens we encounter. They are peaceful, so long as we let them be. But they are perhaps the most warlike and aggressive species we've ever encountered, without exception. The only reason they are peaceful is because they make considerable effort to rise above their nature and become something greater than they were. And I fear that whomever first discovers this the hard way will become little more than a chapter in the annals of history, an important lesson for the rest of us. Don't poke the humans. End of story. I would quickly like to thank our Tier 5 patrons, Dragzoon WRE, Quantum Wednesday, Ambrose Cattell, Lord Ashrakul, Bushmaster 177, Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, and Arcadian. Thank you very much.